Dragon Age The Veilguard has been out for 2 weeks, and one thing has become quite clear. The game might be running out of steam, which some will argue that's totally normal for a big-budget single-player experience. Some, though, will also argue that if you compare this to any of the other big-budget RPGs the last few years, they were doing far better numbers at this point, and the publishers made sure to let everyone know of it. Dragon Age is an established franchise, and a triumphant return after a decade of being dormant should probably be garnering a bigger reaction, but it hasn't happened. If anything, it's just been a lot of negativity. Word of mouth matters, and the critic reviews don't carry the weight that they once did. This is a game that likely needed to sell 5 to 7 million copies at launch to make a profit. BioWare's Edmonton office has been working on this game for 10 years, likely in full production since Anthem's release in 2019. It's been through a reboot and tons of departures, a lot of chaos. Currently, BioWare employs around 500 or more developers. Most of those employees are making six figures, and it's reasonable to believe this is a $200 to $400 million game, which requires millions in sales, which all indication is that it isn't reaching those numbers right now. But the chaos surrounding this game in terms of games media coverage has only continued as well. We talked recently about this Aftermath article written by a former Kotaku writer that argued that YouTubers and Twitter are responsible for the poisoned state of video game discourse. Zero accountability with their own role with how games media failed readers the last decade or so. But my most recent video is a lengthy one, dedicated to dissecting that drivel, along with a Forbes writer which tried comparing the Veilguard to Hogwarts Legacy and argued that games media was overwhelmingly fair to Hogwarts, as evidenced by the Metacritic score. Yeah, that's what he argued. In the days since that video, the Forbes writer has only doubled down, but chose not to respond when I confronted him with the facts. Hogwarts Legacy was a clear example of ideological bias, and review scores don't tell the whole story. Many reviews had points that had nothing to do with the game, and many outlets ran with disclaimers. IGN's reviewer said nobody at the company wanted to cover it. Rock Paper Shotgun refused to cover it. Fanbyte said they wouldn't cover it. The Gamer only ran negative articles. Kotaku said it was rotten. Wired's 1 out of 10 was horrendous. PC Gamer gave it a positive score and still decried the game, same with Loadout and many other outlets. That's why when glowing review scores came down for Dragon Age The Veilguard from the carefully selected access media sites, readers overwhelmingly scoffed at that coverage, especially with the viral clips that would follow showing the modern day preachy politics that have no business being in a dark fantasy franchise like Dragon Age, as noted by the Forbes writer's colleague Eric Kane, that has far more integrity than most in this industry. But the games media circus show meltdown has only continued with Dragon Age The Veilguard. We have IGN now running a negative article, which is very interesting coming from an outlet that just a couple of weeks ago gave this game a 9 out of 10, declaring it one of the best BioWare experiences. But I guess we gotta play both sides, especially since a lot of users are feeling very different about Dragon Age. Dragon Age The Veilguard is at war with itself. The sequel to Inquisition's Dreadwolf story is trapped in an action game with no interest in the past, which feels like a lot of points that many of us were bringing up for a while. The overall result is that Dragon Age The Veilguard isn't the golden era BioWare game that I had hoped it would be. You know, I feel like being gaslit here because games media was just arguing the complete opposite. Torn between continuing its traditional role-playing legacy and starting afresh as a modern action RPG, the end result is an awkward sequel trapped in a cage made of reboot ideas. And then an even more blasphemous article is this piece from Vice. I don't even know how to describe it. Dragon Age The Veilguard, the necessity of games journalism. The Dragon Age The Veilguard has been another example of exactly why players need games journalism more than they... Yes, you need games journalism. You just don't realize it yet. Oh god, Vice. We're going back to the trenches with this one, so it's no secret Dragon Age The Veilguard is the latest DEI game to be subjected to criticism with zero bearing on the actual game itself. You know, all of that content surrounding certain characters and the preachy political stuff that has no business being in a dark fantasy franchise like this, just ignore it. It has no bearing on the actual game itself. Just ignore that content. Let's imagine a world without video game outlets, no IGN, no Kotaku, no Polygon. They all just poof overnight, gone. No more reviews or insights from games journalists. Telling me about a very bright future if that's indeed the case. You know what that leaves you with to gouge how good a game is, and yes, Vice is about to generalize and pick a random Metacritic comment up, and we don't even know if this is a real comment, but censoring on Metacritic has gotten completely out of hand. Not a smart move if you want to stay relevant, aka in business, because this whole NWO Great Reset woke psyop has failed, narrative's crumbling, and everybody's not bailing out in time will go down with it. This, in case you couldn't tell, is a user review from Metacritic. They're picking this comment out to generalize all user reviews, but anybody would know on platforms even like Metacritic or Steam, players and users are usually able to, give points to it and say if it's helpful or not, and most people probably wouldn't say that this is helpful, because it doesn't say anything specifically towards the content, and it's also not really that funny. But we're going to generalize because they're trying to make an indictment on user reviews and talking about a future that doesn't even exist. Dragon Age The Veilguard is a lesson to us all. Now, what did you meaningfully glean from that comment? What information that excerpt will help you decide whether Veilguard is worth your time? That game has characters of different ethnicities, and I don't even think that comment had anything to do about that, and that's bad. This brand of criticism extends to YouTube, and yes, here's the generalization. They move it from user reviews now to people like myself, because this is what these outlets have been doing. They're trying to attack this medium as a lot of YouTubers and Twitch individuals, because they're starting to gain a lot more traction than them. Games media is dying, and they have to put the attack, especially they have to give themselves weight for why access media needs to continue, why these publishers need to feed into their media machines, but at the same time, they're losing jobs while a lot of yourself, readers, are looking to individual creators for coverage. And these outlets like Vice like to gaslit their audience and lie about coverage that's coming from most, YouTubers and such. They say, sure, a few YouTubers provide thoughtful feedback on the strengths and weaknesses of a game, but some of them couldn't care less about worthwhile, relevant, informed discourse. That's a very small minority, if we're being honest. They don't have to talk about the gameplay, visuals, characters, story, pacing, mechanics, or any of the other nuances one look for in a traditional review for a game. But guess what? Most reviews from YouTubers, the Mr. Matty Plays, SkillUps, ACG, Wolfheart, Fextra Life, so on and so forth, all of them have meaningful criticisms about the actual game. Instead, they can turn their camera on and say a game sucks because it has pronouns in it. And again, they're not giving any examples. They're just picking a random YouTuber. I'm sure there's one out there, but they're not actually giving any examples. They're just generalizing over many individuals in this medium. Or features too much diversity, or ruined a franchise by introducing any other sexual orientation that isn't straight, or gender identity that isn't a man/woman. And these aren't real criticisms. Many are very comfortable in understanding the LGBT themes in franchises like Baldur's Gate and Dragon Age. They aren't talking about that. They're talking about the preachy political angle that a lot of these franchises have gone for with the modern day politics that are thrown into franchises, especially fantasy franchises, that have no business for that stuff being there. But again, outlets like Vice can't admit that stuff because it doesn't feed into their narrative that they're trying to deliver to their readers with this article. The readers that are left, I suppose. There isn't a conversation, a point to it all, just noise. It's funny though, Dragon Age The Veilguard is getting lambasted for its inclusive elements because it apparently isn't a 10 out of 10 experience. Meanwhile, I don't recall Baldur's Gate 3 getting a whole lot of flack for, oh wait, never mind, I guess I had a momentary mental lapse. And the big thing about Baldur's Gate 3 is that it handled a lot of those subjects with a lot more nuance and care. That's the big issue with Dragon Age The Veilguard, in my opinion. And also there's a lot more freedom with the RPG elements within Baldur's Gate 3, and it leads by examples in that regard. But traditionally, people will excuse all that gross diversity if the quality is high enough, but true to form, that bar is only cleared once perfection is agreed upon. No real-world parallels there at all. And the thing about Dragon Age The Veilguard right now is that the game still is doing all right in review scores. Even from critics, it actually only has an 81. I think that's going to lower probably to the high 70s when everything's said and done. And only 68% of critics recommending the experience, and then users gave it a 30 out of 100, which I don't know, I just find that funny in my opinion. But the big thing about Dragon Age The Veilguard is that the sentiment surrounding this game, even with all these positive review scores, it is overwhelmingly negative, which contributes to a very nightmarish scenario for BioWare and Electronic Arts, where they need to make millions upon millions of sales, and it just doesn't appear to, it's not going to happen. And the same story is on Metacritic right now. As you can see, 82 for, I think this is the PlayStation 5 review, it's a 78 on PC, and Xbox is the highest at an 85. User review score, though, much lower. And we actually did see Metacritic respond to this review protest because Forbes' Paul Tassi had to reach out about it. Metacritic responds to this review bombing, and Tassi said he asked them for a comment about the slew of Metacritic user scores describing Veilguard with terms like woke, DEI propaganda, agenda-driven, and so on. They issued the following statement: "We take online trust and safety very seriously across all of our sites, including Metacritic. Metacritic has a moderation system in place to track violations of terms of use. Our team reviews each and every report of abuse, and if violations occur, the reviews are removed. The question is what Metacritic actually labels abuse, and if many of these reviews meet those terms." And this is another example of an article that very much has an angle for it. There's a reason why Paul Tassi of Forbes reached out for a comment about this, because he views comments like this as problematic, and they should not be allowed. But let's be honest, a lot of these individuals who have played Dragon Age The Veilguard are even walking away with this feeling, this sentiment, and maybe it's not said in the most articulate way, but this is a perspective that many players have about Dragon Age The Veilguard. And it's not like these comments are only limited to these Metacritic review pages, because it's also things I've seen on Steam. And again, you can just easily ignore or discount these, but again, outlets like Forbes, they have a narrative that they want to spread with this, and they view that this is problematic and should be censored and taken down. In my opinion, that is not something that should happen. Now, in terms of how Dragon Age The Veilguard is doing right now, I think it's rather interesting. Jason Schreier deleted a tweet which was laughing about the game succeeding. He's been very tuned into a lot of the things that have been going on behind the scenes at EA BioWare for years. And he originally wrote, "Go woke, go bro," or top the charts. And then somebody said, "There's no way you genuinely like this turd." And he said, "I actually don't like the game very much, but I do like seeing you chuds get dunked on." He deleted the original tweet, which I think may say a lot, especially if the game isn't doing all that well. And the thing is, it's also rather notable that BioWare immediately came out saying there's going to be no DLC at all. And this is going to be the first time for this franchise, and they're already focusing on the next Mass Effect game, which might be them just trying to move on from this experience because they realize they're not going to make a lot of money from this. And BioWare has had a very interesting track record the last number of years in terms of sales. You can look to Mass Effect Andromeda. It was still at the top 10 UK sales charts. It was still #1, I think, after a couple of weeks. And then they also, Electronic Arts, weeks later, said the game was a financial success. But that didn't stop the fact that the game wasn't going to be receiving any DLC after all, and the studio was scaled down, shut down, and Mass Effect was put on ice for the last number of years until they made the Legendary Edition a couple of years ago. And I think that says a lot about how these charts and being #1 on UK retail, it just doesn't mean anything. Especially because even if the game is a financial success, there still is a threshold that Electronic Arts, their executives want the game to meet. And with Dragon Age, I think that's the same exact story here. And with Anthem, it is worth mentioning that it was revealed just recently the game sold 5 million copies, but still was a massive failure for BioWare. But also I think it's important to note that we don't know if those 5 million copies came from, $70 sales or just a couple of dollars, because I remember going into the dollar store and seeing copies of this game, which might be why this game ended up reaching 5 million copies. But there has been some supposed insider accounts coming about in regards to Dragon Age The Veilguard, which is rather interesting. We have this article coming from That Park Place. Dragon Age The Veilguard rumored to have sold less than Star Wars Outlaws, which notably sold only 1 million sales within its first couple of weeks, which was honestly is baffling, especially for an open world Star Wars game. But this article goes on to mention that apparently, according to them, this is a YouTuber Endymion who supposedly has a source within EA BioWare. Again, take all this with a grain of salt, but he alleges, apparently, according to them, pre-orders for Veilguard were even less than initially thought. I told you in the last video there were roughly 115,000 total pre-orders across all platforms. That's digital and physical, by the way, and new info that my sources now told me that the numbers actually may have been too high. The number that they are hearing from people at EA now is that it was actually between 70 to 75,000 pre-orders in total before release, which is, not good at all. In total, which I'm told is that Veilguard may have sold overall so far anyway in the 500,000 range, which may sound good to some, but this is completely abysmal for a game of this level. And if that was accurate, I think BioWare would have to be shut down. There's just no way it was 500,000, at least at this point. We're going to get to some of the data in a second, but I think all indication is that it probably is underperforming, but I don't think it's to this level. But hey, I could be wrong. This YouTuber continued with his allegations, saying, "As I was told by the same source, BioWare's higher-ups believed this game would skyrocket past 100,000 concurrent players on Steam during launch. It didn't, of course. It only hit 89,000 as drop since." And I think that is a rather notable point, because when you look to a lot of the, big budget RPGs that have been launching on Steam, even Dragon's Dogma 2 earlier this year, I think it had a peak of like 230,000 players. Dragon Age peaked at under 100,000. Obviously, that doesn't say anything necessarily to the ownership of the game, especially with other platforms, but I don't think it is doing the numbers that BioWare probably thought that this needed to do for them. Apparently, in terms of the EA subscription service where you pay a monthly fee to play the catalog of games, which Veilguard is part of, this offer only ends up pulling in around 20,000 players on Origin, as I'm told, which is hardly anything for a game that, again, needs far more than this to succeed. And the big thing about sales, even on Xbox, Steam, PlayStation, there's a 30% fee that goes to these platforms. So yes, BioWare needs to make a lot of money from this, especially if they're investing tons of money into this project like they have. I'm also told in terms of refunds that currently the game has at least 30,000 refunds in the past few weeks and days. That's crazy if that's true, which is not good for your game that has barely sold 500,000 copies to be hemorrhaging players like this. He then then shared. So generally speaking, Veilguard is not a commercial success. It needed to sell around 4 to 5 million mark. I think it may actually need to make more than that to make a profit at least, and well, it's not doing that. And if you look at the Steam top sellers list right now, this is about 2 weeks after launch, it has dropped drastically. It was at the number 2 spot, I think, in the first couple of days, and never passed, I think, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, but now it's all the way down to like the 11th, 12th spot, and it is quickly falling. And I think that is because the game has lost steam, which again, some will argue that it's just the notable nature of these single-player games, but I think if you look to other single-player RPGs, a lot of them stayed in the spotlight at least for a couple more weeks. This has been pretty fast, and yeah, that's rather notable in my opinion. And there still are 33,000 players on it, but again, it only peaked at 89,000. And estimates listed here on SteamDB of how many people actually bought Dragon Age The Veilguard, it goes from anywhere from 190,000 players to 600,000. And another platform, Game Sensor, which tracks this, says it's probably around 300,000 owners of Dragon Age The Veilguard, and those are numbers that would be nightmarish for Electronic Arts, and it would almost make me fear that they would not even make it to Mass Effect 5 if it is indeed that bad. But say what you will about the user review scores on OpenCritic and Metacritic, but if you look at those Steam reviews, it still is lowering. It's right around to 70%, and again, with time, that's probably only going to get lower as more and more reviews come in. And it's not like I'm creating this perspective from thin air, because the Steam user reviews went from about a 79% and it's already down to about 70%, which is something similar we saw last year with Bethesda's Starfield. Die-hard fans are there day one with the positive reviews, but once that non-diehard audience comes in, well, we get the real sentiment, which looks to be what's happening here with Dragon Age, and yes, it is souring more and more. And I think that negative sentiment, especially coming from users, really tells the story about how this game is performing, which is not good enough. And it is worth mentioning, though, there is a different story on platforms like Microsoft. As you can see here, top paid games, Dragon Age The Veilguard, just the lone single edition right here, and then the deluxe edition are in the top 10. So they are selling copies, but the thing is, there's not a lot of players on Xbox. And then if you look to PlayStation, top 10 games in your country, it still is in the top 7, as you can see here, but it's not at the top. And some of these releases have been out for a while now, and there hasn't been many big new games except for Call of Duty Black Ops 6. So in terms of how, number-wise this may look good, but it doesn't actually say anything to the success of this game. If there was a couple of other massive releases right now, we could say, oh wow, it's actually doing better than XX game, but we don't have that right now. And then as you can see, new games and Phasmophobia and Minecraft are the only other big release next to Dragon Age The Veilguard and Black Ops 6, so it just doesn't say much. And then the retail charts, which really don't mean much anymore nowadays, it's actually not even at the number 2 spot, it's at the number 3 spot in UK retail charts, and that is because EA's own EA Sports FC 25 is at number 2, Black Ops 6 obviously holding on to the top spot. And then it was also mentioned here, The Veilguard also took number 2 in the PS5 top 10 and number 3 in the Xbox Series chart. But obviously most sales are now done digitally, and we have no way of gouging necessarily, specifically, how the game is doing, and Electronic Arts probably won't talk about this game in terms of its sales performance until the next investor call. But in terms of, all of the chaos surrounding this game, I think it is rightful to come around with the assessment of why wouldn't BioWare immediately come out with sales data, especially if this game is succeeding, and they haven't done that. Maybe that is just because of how Electronic Arts runs this company, because they rarely do that as far as I understand. But I do think with a game that's as controversial as this, you'd probably want to shout that data at people and say, hey look, people are actually playing this game, and they haven't done that. So yeah, right now I don't necessarily think this game is tanking, but I do think it is underperforming. I'd guess they'd probably have sold between 1.5 to 2 million sales, and with the budget and time factored into this conversation, that could mean this game is losing money for Electronic Arts. Even then, you can look to how EA previously handled, say, Mass Effect Andromeda, canceling DLC and shutting down the studio while still saying the game was a financial success for them. Actions speak louder than words. These companies are striving to make a profit, and even with Andromeda supposedly making EA some money, it wasn't enough. Nearly a decade later, the gaming landscape has changed, in which budgets and dev timelines are ballooning. The need for a project that's been worked on for so long to be a hit is more important than ever, especially for a publisher like EA, which makes most of its money not from these types of games anymore, and it potentially reinforces a perspective some have in the business world that games like this, the risk associated with them, aren't worth it, because yes, the chase for EA FC money is what so many publishers want from all of their big name franchises, because recurrent consumer spending something that can go into the billions is a lot more alluring than a single-player game that is make or break come launch day. We'll see how EA handles this launch in the coming weeks, maybe at their next investor call, but the divisiveness has certainly fueled negativity around a company, BioWare, that could not afford it. Anyway, have you been playing Dragon Age The Veilguard or not? Let me know your thoughts on the game down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.